Welcome back and a happy new year from all of us here at Political Paradigms for the first episode of 2024. An illustrious guest. It's Sonny. Hello, Sonny.
Hello.
It's me and you today, and would you say 2024 is already off with a bang, or is it more of a fizzle?
I would say it is it was a gong, It started. It wasn't abrupt, no, nothing crazy. The fires have been lit, of the old general election campaign machines, the old coal, the ones that they all have in their party HQs. And so everything's getting going, everything's bubbling along, I'd say. But I wouldn't say it's anything crazy's happened.
That seems about right to me, and I thought we'd start, because obviously on this podcast we are obsessed with general election dates. I think before the new year I said October, Theo very much said May. Where were you at, Sonny? I don't quite remember.
Yeah, I was May.
You were...
I thought with the spring budget coming out on the 6th, I thought, it's going to have to be May or maybe June. But you have some more information, which probably you'd like to talk about now.
We certainly do. So Rishi Sunak has come out the gate, basically kicking off the week, kicking off the year. Everyone was saying May election, May election, May election, and at the same time there was sort of a bit of a moment of peril for Sunak, because it was essentially a case of going to get to May, Labour will have raised expectations of a coming election, and then Labour can, very happily go, he's bottled it. So if you listen here, this is what Sunak himself actually had to say when asked about a general election. First things first, he confirmed it would be this year, which is always helpful, instead of January 2025. Here's the rest of what he said.
My working assumption is we'll have a general election in the second half of this year. And in the meantime, I've got lots that I want to get on with. This Saturday, we'll be introducing a significant tax cut for millions of people in work, worth on average £450.
You get the picture. But the second half of this year, and the Times over the last couple of weekends has basically said, in number 10, they have penciled in a specific date. Would you like to know the specific date, Sonny?
I would, yes.
The 14th of November. So the week after the US elections, we are set for a November election. A couple of weeks will decide who leads the UK and who leads the US for the next 4 or 5 years. And it's going to be a long road to the election. Sonny, do you think this is a bluff, or do you buy this?
You know what? Honestly, I don't think I've been so just astonished, positively and negative. Well, mostly negatively, to be honest, by the Conservative Party under Sunak. Sorry, I will believe anything they put out. If they said that if Sunak was gonna and James Cleverly and Jeremy Hunt were going to do a fun run in pink, I'd believe it at this point. I don't know. I think I'd believe anything they put out, because they just don't seem to have any consistent idea of what they're trying to achieve. So if they're going to say 14th of November, I personally think it was going to be October. So yeah, but I think their strategy, right? I think by putting it in November, not May, to me, is just them saying we are desperate and we really, really, really hope that, given ourselves 3 or 4 months or however long more, some miracle will come down and smite Starmer and his 18% and 18-point lead in the polls. So I think it's the last ditch attempt, if anything.
That's it. It's known as the something will turn up theory, isn't it? Something will save us. Something will happen. And for every, possibility that something happens that's great for them, this is the possibility it gets worse. I think the mood in the country is pretty much time for a change. And I have seen sort of Tory grandees. I think William Hague warned this. A few other people warned this. Danny Finkelstein were basically saying, look, this is like 1997. And like 1997, if you hold out, people will get angrier and sort of vote you out even more. Whereas if you go in May... people might respect you for actually letting them vote. Some YouGov data, the public prefers a May election, unsurprisingly. It looks rough. Labour have put out some posters going like Sunak's bottled it, general election now. I mean, it was always, it would be suicidal to call an election when you're 18 percentage points down in the polls. Stranger things have happened, but I'm kind of working on the assumption that the sort of mid-November date is true now. It seems the furthest they can go without being ridiculous and doing like a Christmas or a January election, basically.
Yeah, I think if they did a January election, and literally they did it at legally the last day possible,
like 28th or something, isn't it? The very, very last day.
Yeah, I think they would be hung, drawn, and quartered inside the centre of Westminster. I think it would just destroy anything. But I think it's a very good point, actually. If I was in the Conservative Party now as one of the top people, which I don't know if I'd want to be because I'd lose my job.
I mean, it wouldn't be a very long job, would it? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
Prepare for the long embrace of opposition is coming your way if you're at CCHQ at the moment.
I mean, I see, it'd be crazy. But anyway, sorry. If I was them, I would say just as how much do you think is going to change between May and November? And if I was them, I would just say you need to think about the long term for the state of the party, and months do really matter. I mean, they say a week is a long time in politics. Think about a month. Think about years. Think about 5 years as the opposition. And I think leaving in May could actually shift, even if it's only like 5 or 6 points. That means that they are 5 or 6 points closer to kind of being able to salvage something, because I would not be surprised if we see a coalition for Labour or an absolute obliteration of the Conservative Party.
That's the array of possibilities from right now, isn't it, really? It can sort of what the Conservatives do in the next few months, much more likely than actually saving them, will determine, how long they're in the wilderness for. Are they competitive in 2028 or 2029? Although, people said Labour was done for in 2019, so you never know. That parties can always bounce back. Keir Starmer had his big New Year set-piece speech. Sunak is sort of doing one on Monday, so the day after the evening this podcast goes out. Keir Starmer's speech basically pitching himself as sort of anti-apathy. Keir Starmer will sweep away the cobwebs of apathy and really be the candidate of change rather than just the anti-Tory candidate. Let's have a little listen to this.
Whether you're thinking of voting Labour for the first time, whether you always vote Labour, or whether you've no intention of voting Labour whatsoever, my party will serve you. I promise a new plan with new...
Oh, hang on. There we go.
My party will serve you. I promise a new plan with new priorities, 5 national missions that will sweep away the era of Tory division. A plan for the long term, with higher growth, a reformed planning system, safer streets, more police in your town, cheaper bills, with GB Energy.
And it goes on. A few other noteworthy quotes saying, I promise this, a politics which treads a little lighter on all our lives. That's the thing about populism or nationalism. It needs your full attention, needs you constantly focusing on this week's common enemy. And that's exhausting. It's something I've noticed Starmer doing a lot at the moment, is basically trying to pitch to the electorate, who, if you listen to focus groups, are completely exhausted with politics. He's trying to pitch himself as, I will somehow restore calm and order. I guess the question is it possible in sort of the volatile political climate to restore calm and order? Or much like with the Biden administration, will that sort of end up with Starmer looking very weak and unpopular very quickly? What do you think, Sonny?
God, well, I think that we are living in an ever more populous world. It feels like you see the growth in Argentina, in the Netherlands. You're seeing it in Germany,
right across Europe.
Yeah, Marie Le Pen stronger than ever. I mean, one win against this kind of more right wing stance was Poland, but it was tight at the end. So we're seeing this whole big super shift, and I'll be honest, I'm 18. This is both the first time we'll be able to vote. I'm not exactly inspired by what Starmer's saying. I don't think it's really holding anything. I do think that honestly, that there made me feel like, oh, he's just saying the same thing as, kind of other centre-right conservatives. He's not saying anything particularly new. Every politician isn't going to turn out and be like, oh, we're actually not going to try and clean up the streets. Like, they're going to say the same thing. The thing is what they're going to do differently. So I think we could see Starmer, which isn't as strong as we think. So I think he's got less charisma. I think when we think back to Blair, and kind of people talked about, I remember someone kind of who was around and kind of was interested in politics at the time, that kind of, it was almost a bit boring, to be honest, because nothing really happened. But Blair had that charisma. He had this kind of like, this kind of energy, this aura, which made it that, he was still popular when nothing really happened. Maybe that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but I don't know. I'm not really sold on Keir Starmer.
I guess the Starmer team would probably counter along the lines of, and there's some truth to this, I do think Keir Starmer is weaker than another leader might be in his position, but is a politician ever going to be as popular as Tony Blair in sort of the era of cynicism? Probably not. Again, is this going to be enough for him to win? Probably yes. Although I do think there is a worry for Labour, which is when they come in power, they're not going to have a sufficient mandate. They're being very cautious, not really saying anything. They're a little bit hostage to fortune, but also once they come in power, there is no clear mandate to do anything sort of radical or different. There's no mandate to sort of increase taxes or embark on any kind of economic project beyond sort of the very, very broad brush painting that we've heard so far. It'd be interesting to see if Keir Starmer is able to drag up his approval ratings, which are pretty lackluster during the campaign. At this point in, obviously Tony Blair, but also David Cameron's journey in opposition, they had an approval rating over 50%. David Cameron wasn't loved, but he was popular before he became Prime Minister. Keir Starmer, it's basically, his approval rating is about 35%. It's pretty poor. It just so happens that Rishi Sunak's approval ratings are diabolical. There was an MRP poll over Christmas. Rishi Sunak is the preferred Prime Minister in only 2 out of 650 constituencies in the country. Keir Starmer is favoured in nearly 400, and the rest say neither. Rishi Sunak isn't favoured as Prime Minister in his own seat of Richmond. So there's sort of, in terms of leadership, there's a lot of apathy, but not necessarily in Sunak's favour.
Yeah, it does just feel like this election is fight of the least popular. It's like, I mean, I do think that if Cameron was Prime Minister, as in, 2010 Cameron versus Starmer, Cameron would win. I think Johnson would win against Starmer. I do think that a lot of the time our parliamentary system, and the parliamentary system of the world, which is also maybe why kind of populist far rightness, which people are kind of talking about now, has been able to grow so quickly, is that people do just love a character, and Starmer isn't really a character. He's a lawyer. He's very punctual. He does this and he does that. And he does it very well, and he'll break down anyone in an argument. But if he's got the same expression the whole time through, no one's going to care. Which is the problem. It's just, it did feel like the only reason, like, for instance, Biden became president was because Trump was president. If it was against anyone else, it feels like he wouldn't have done as well.
I think that's right. Reform UK have been out and about as well. Another big player. If you look at sort of an average of the opinion polls at the moment, you've got the Lib Dems hovering around 10-11%. Reform rocketing up, nearly overtaking the Lib Dems now. Almost all at the expense of the Conservatives. But they've come out swinging. This was their leader, Richard Tice, at his beginning of the year press conference.
On immigration, we've got to freeze non-essential immigration. One in, one out. That is what the British people vote, I believe. That's what the people want. The British people never voted for mass immigration. And finally, we've got to scrap the totally job-destroying trillion-pound cost of net zero. Just that alone will make people better off. That alone will ease the cost of living crisis.
So sort of a combined Liz Truss, Nigel Farage pitch of very steep cuts to tax and government spending, cuts to regulation, a total net freeze on immigration, which would obviously have very disastrous economic effects in the short term, and basically a scrapping of all policies addressing climate change. They're not saying whether Nigel Farage will come back and campaign. I think, as we said on the podcast, heading into the new year, whether Nigel Farage comes back or not will determine how well Reform do. They're standing in, I think it's the Wellingborough by-election coming up soon. It will be a good test as to whether Reform UK get a vote share in that by-election commensurate to their polling, because so far they're polling all right, but in actual elections, no one's really voting for them. It's definitely a big drag on the Conservatives. Nigel Farage sort of teasing a return earlier because Rishi Sunak put out an interview basically saying every vote for Nigel Farage is a vote for Starmer. Nigel Farage says, Rishi Sunak's constant lies and spin on everything from tax to the channel crossings is making me think that perhaps he needs to be taught an unforgettable lesson. Thinly veiled threat from Nigel Farage there. Reform saying that they're not solely taking away from the Tories. They are, statistically that's true. Saying that the only way to stop, quote, Starmageddon and an incompetent left-wing Labour government is to vote for Reform UK, not the Tories, which again doesn't make sense. I'm not quite sure what they're doing there. Sonny, what are your thoughts on Reform UK and this sort of mess heading into the new year?
It is a mess.
Yeah.
It is. It's such a weird state. I think it's because I remember in 2019, the BBC's coverage of the election, they had Farage on. If I'm correct, I believe it was him. I'm pretty sure.
He came on the
4 years
BBC on election night. Didn't he try and take credit for Johnson's majority, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he was basically saying that Reform is, well, I think it was Reform at the time, or Britain First, or whatever it was called.
Brexit Party.
Brexit Party, thank you, that was it. Kind of standing with the Conservatives, that like has a little brother to, and their only thing is to try and take seats off the Labour Party, take votes away from the Labour Party. I don't really remember what they did in the end. I don't think they didn't get a seat. I know that much.
They basically stood down in Tory seats, and they basically, statistically, it looks like they probably cost Labour an additional 20 seats. So they did help the Tories in that election.
Right, okay, that's big. Yeah, that's big. That can be. Yeah, but it was weird, and so Reform to me is just a kind of it's a group of kind of quite extremists who, because of our parliamentary system, don't get a lot of seats. Although kind of proportionally they probably should get a lot more seats, but it's the same with a lot of other parties. We see that before Brexit, before UK, it was UKIP. They always polled quite high, never got any seats. I think it's going to be the same as Reform, but I think that there's enough people in concentrated enough areas for Reform to maybe even get a couple seats.
Do you think it's possible? Would this be like safe Tory seats or what?
I think there would be quite a few. I think they might do well in the north because I see there's a few seats in which were Labour, the red wall, that then fell, and a lot of the people in the red wall actually voted for Brexit, but Labour, it was Corbyn anyway, and so the Tories kind of, as you know, in 2019 got in on a kind of Brexit mandate in some ways.
Stop Corbyn, have Brexit, basically.
Exactly, that was the idea. I think Reform could pick up a few of those seats in which people are getting kind of, they don't like this kind of like, they'll look upon Starmer as kind of centre-left. Sunak is almost like centre-left. But then, obviously there's going to be lots of people who see Sunak as, far-right almost. But no, I think they could, I think if Reform get 3 seats, that is amazing for them. If they get 6 seats, they've done brilliantly. I do think they'll get at least 1 or 2 seats.
And I guess if they do, as you predict, get sort of UKIP levels of the vote, or even half of that, that is like, what, 50 Conservative seats gone, basically, to Labour, isn't it? By virtue of the electoral system. So from Labour's perspective, having them come out sort of all guns blazing is a good thing, even though they're sort of...
Yeah, it's brilliant.
This is a Red Wall poll from December. Labour are on 48% in the Red Wall. The Conservatives on 28%. So Labour higher, and the Conservatives a little higher than nationally, but Labour higher, because in the Red Wall polls now, Labour is often around 50%, which obviously nationally that would be crazy. So they are more Labour-leaning than the rest of the country at present. Reform UK on about 11% in the Red Wall, whereas if you poll sort of Blue Wall type seats, it's more like 2 or 3%. So they are definitely... They've got more of a foothold. I think in the north, in the sort of the Red Wall seats, it is that sort of Brexit appeal. It's the kind of voter that would have voted for Boris Johnson, basically.
Yeah. Well, actually, interestingly, in an article I was reading, some people were saying that, like, Reform were going to do quite well in a couple of the kind of safe Tory seats, the shires, mainly because that's where the kind of the small boat crossing immigration aspect is kind of most at large. I mean, it's still, you know, proportionally very small amount of people crossing, but it's a lot of them on the kind of south coast, closest to France.
I buy that.
Yeah, so that could be interesting to see where they swing. I don't know if Reform are going to get a whole seat, because there is some, like, you know, there's a couple Tory seats which are like massive majorities.
I guess you can imagine a scenario where, like, maybe it's a safe Tory seat, Tory vote collapses, Labour take half of it, Reform creep through the middle or something. You could imagine some messed up scenario like that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's going to be quite a few. I think there's going to be a lot of swing seats are going to go very secure in one way, and then I think there's going to be a lot of safe seats that become swing seats, at least for this election.
So, looking at Rishi Sunak, obviously safe to say a damaged political figure heading into the new year. Yeah. Basically staring down the end of his time in power. A lot of people think he's holding the election in November, so he can say he's been Prime Minister for 2 years. Couldn't possibly comment, but I kind of would believe that. Doing a speech tomorrow, going around the country, quote-unquote, meeting real people. Was in Manchester getting booed in a cafe yesterday. Was having a lovely time. He was on Laura Koonsberg today. Again, sort of all right. In answer to every question, he basically went, well, you should ask Keir Starmer this question, which didn't really help the image of power ebbing away from the man. So, big strategy seems to be the economy will get better later in the year, and tax cuts. They're looking at doing tax cuts in March, big tax cuts, probably potentially on income tax. I do suspect they may be floating inheritance tax as a distraction, and they'll sort of, quote-unquote, try and wrong foot Labour with income tax. And it looks like they're, again, planning another fiscal event before the November election. So they may actually come up with another autumn statement with even more tax cuts. So they're basically going to try and load everyone up with tax cuts before the election and hope that, combined with sort of wages outpacing inflation finally, will create enough of a feel-good effect. Labour are going to counter that by saying, you are poorer than you were at the beginning of this parliament, regardless of sort of the green shoots now. And again, this is contingent on sort of a big energy shock from the Middle East, not sort of completely pushing inflation back up again, which obviously would be terrible, but is plausible. Something to keep an eye on the Middle East for in terms of the election, actually. More instability in the Middle East will worsen the economic backdrop for Sunak heading into the election. Now, my opinion on this is, you know, if Sunak can hold together politically, strategically, which again, he hasn't been able to in the last year, and the economy's doing a little bit better, and there are tax cuts, you know, maybe they'll save a few seats. I don't think it's anywhere near enough to prevent sort of the tide of change, politically, especially considering people are going to be poorer than they were last time they voted, which hasn't happened in a British election for decades, including ones governments have won. You know, in 97, voters were better off than they were in 92. In 24, voters will actually be poorer than they were in 2019. Sonny, what do you think? Is the tax cut strategy, the go long and cut taxes strategy, is that the best strategy they have and it's just the best of a bad bunch, or is there something they could genuinely do that would help them more, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's I think the Conservatives do fully understand what position they are in. It is a very dire position. I think they are probably trying to go and just throw everything they have at in their arsenal at this election. I think that the Conservatives are hampered by the fact that Sunak is their leader. I think, as you said before, he has an absolutely atrocious, appalling polling score.
He's basically where Jeremy Corbyn was in 2019. That's how low he's gone.
Yeah, and you know, Labour then get kind of absolutely thrashed in the election. Yeah, no, I think that it's. I think that things about cutting taxes will try and make them look more conservative, and you know that's their plan. You know, the people are the money. You know, we're the money people. Yada yada yada. I think they'll probably try and push some sort of thing about, you know, we're the ones tackling immigration. You know, we've led this country through Brexit, which is what the people wanted. There's been no massive economic problems. You know, I mean, okay, it's been pretty terrible for people, but there hasn't been that many riots on the streets. It really has not been a very good time for Britain. Inflation's at like kind of an all-time high. Same as immigration, all these things. But the Conservatives are going to try and spin it as the tax-cutting liberals that gave the people what they wanted, and you know, doing this and doing that, and yeah. But honestly, I think it doesn't matter. To be honest, I think the Conservatives could go extreme, you know, Bolshevik, and it wouldn't affect their score. I think they could go anarcho-capitalist, and it wouldn't do anything.
I mean, that was kind of the Liz Truss project in a way, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Looking at the polling now, I mean, some of this is awful for them. So Labour are currently on 44%. The Conservatives are on 25%. That's the lowest any incumbent party has been going into an election since God knows when. Approval rating of Rishi Sunak, 27% favourable, 60% unfavourable. Whew. On the economy, 39% trust Labour and 28% trust the Conservatives. Labour currently hold, going into an election year, an 11-point lead on the economy. That is staggering. In 2020, the Conservatives held a 20-point lead over Labour on the economy. And it's been like that all through since 2010. When Theresa May was doing terribly, she had a big lead over Labour on the economy. When austerity was happening, the Conservatives had a big lead over Labour on the economy. So if they can't move that stat, and that stat also tells me when they launch sort of the usual attacks, don't trust Starmer, they're talking about green spending. Starmer's come out very strongly this weekend going, I will borrow to invest sort of on green spending, and I'm defending that policy. Because Labour currently has more economic credibility, it makes me think the attacks may not work in the way they sort of magically always do normally. I mean, what do you think? Do you think attacks on Labour overspending will be received by voters, or will they sort of go, well, you did it as well, so we don't care, sort of thing?
Yeah, no, I think the Conservative Party over their time have been quite good at dodging some allegations, but I think that they have probably one of the weakest, you know, legs to stand on in this debate, in which, what have they done about government borrowing? Nothing.
Well, indeed.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm incorrect, but I think it's close to an all-time high, their borrowing. Of course, we've had a pandemic, and we've had two major conflicts, which has really massively shaped everything. We've had Brexit, so there's lots of things that's happened which has resulted in the Conservatives not being in a position to try and cut down on government borrowing. But I think Labour Labour saying they're going to borrow, all right, you could kind of be like, oh, it's same old, same old. They're just going to carry on ruining this economy. And, remember, old Labour. And it's just like, I don't think anyone's really falling for it. Honestly, as we've been talking, I've come to the conclusion that one of the only ways the Conservatives are going to be close to even winning an election is if they put David Cameron back as leader, as Prime Minister.
I just don't. I don't buy the Dave will save us theory. Maybe 2010 David Cameron, but don't you think he's just so battered as a political figure? He would, much like Sunak, because when Sunak came in, he was more popular than the party, and everyone was like, he'll save us. Don't you think Cameron would come in, maybe be more popular than the party for a few weeks, and then sort of the party would drag him down?
I don't know. I really don't know, because I personally think that David Cameron, and I know it literally is somehow, I don't know how, but when I talk to people and they go, oh my God, Rishi Sunak, what are we doing? And then someone says, David Cameron, they're like, yeah, that's an interesting proposition. I mean, like, we've all forgotten the scandals he's been involved in. Like, you are completely right. He's been, he hasn't been, the greatest person outside of politics and government. But I just don't. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't think Sunak really wants to win the next election, because people are talking about how he wants to go off to the United States, and I think him saying he was Prime Minister for 2 years is probably enough for him. And he'll get his prime ministerial pension, and he'll put some mates as sirs and barons and all sorts of stuff in his leaving letter or whatever they call it. So, yeah, but honestly, I think having Cameron in could be one of the only things that could keep them close to coalition even.
I mean, right now, David Cameron, popular 20%, unpopular 52%. So it's basically the mirror image of Sunak's ratings. It's considerably less.
Maybe I'm wrong then.
Considerably less popular than Keir Starmer, which is difficult. So I don't know. It's possible. Let's look at Theresa May. He is about as unpopular as Theresa May, about as unpopular as Priti Patel. Can you tell I'm on the YouGov site looking at all the politicians' approval ratings? He's less popular than good old John Major. Less popular than Rory Stewart. Yeah, I don't know. It's a wild card, but my prior right now is, unless and until the Conservative Party is more popular, a Conservative leader will just be as unpopular as the party, if that makes sense.
I do see that.
I think Sunak, if the Tories were popular, Sunak would be doing fine. All the attributes people hate about Sunak, they hate because he's sort of associated with 14 years of Conservative government in a way. And also he's a pretty poor strategist and politician. Anyway, over to the United States.
I think he's just completely lackluster and boring, if anything.
I would second that. I mean, that's all our frontline politicians at the moment. Over to the United States, because we did say we would start looking at the United States and
yes,
the politics over there. Few stories to rattle through. Obviously, the Republican primary race is heating up. It's sort of a 3-horse race now. Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley. Ron DeSantis, in the last week, has very nearly shrunk into third place in the Republican primary polls, which is shocking considering he started out as sort of, this is the guy that'll take down Trump. As of today, Trump is on 62%, Ron DeSantis is on 12%, Nikki Haley is on 11%. So nationally, the picture is complete dominance by Trump. I would put money on him winning all 50 states in the primary. He's sort of running like an incumbent president. When we look at Iowa, which is happening in about a week, and New Hampshire as well, in Iowa, it's a little closer. Trump's on 50%, DeSantis on 18%, Haley on 16%. I think the race in Iowa is basically for second place. If Haley can come second in the state where DeSantis is now staking everything, then I think DeSantis is basically cooked, and Haley becomes the only horse in town, as it were. Is that the saying? I think it is. The only race in town? I don't know. And then New Hampshire is the really interesting one, because New Hampshire is not, I must stress this, not representative of Republican voters as a whole. It is a state where in the primary, sorry, I said primary for Iowa, didn't I? It's a caucus in Iowa. In New Hampshire, the primary it features a lot of independent voters. A good example is in the 2000 primary, where George Bush was running for the nomination. He was dominant nationally. He lost in New Hampshire to John McCain because independent voters that don't vote in the rest of the Republican primary states, or most of them, voted for McCain. So McCain won a few contests against Bush, but the race was never competitive. Haley is doing disproportionately well with unrepresentative voters. In a way, this is a bit like with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders could beat Hillary Clinton in certain whiter, better educated states, but overall, Hillary Clinton was dominant because of her advantage with African-American voters in the Democratic primary. In the Republican primary, Trump is dominant with the voters he needs to be. In New Hampshire, less representative, he's weaker. So he is currently leading Haley by only 11 points. And Haley is surging. So keep an eye on New Hampshire, because if Trump loses New Hampshire, the race doesn't necessarily get competitive, but it gets interesting. Sonny, what are you watching out for in this primary race? Is it over, or are you holding out hope for some competition?
I think the only chance that Trump doesn't become president is from some sort of miracle.
President or nominee?
Sorry?
President or Republican nominee?
Sorry, president. I think nominee, especially the stats you just read out just then, I think DeSantis and his heeled boots can go back to Florida.
Do you think it's DeSantis over, as it were? Is it cooked?
Yeah, I think he got slightly found out. I think everyone saw him as this kind of like, not saving grace, but like this guy who people were like, oh wow, this man's pretty cool, and then he went up against Trump, and they were just like, oh, he's dead, man. Well, not dead, obviously, but like he's kind of dead in the water in that way.
I mean, I've never seen anything. The collapse, considering he was neck and neck with Trump at the beginning of last year. I mean, it's stunning.
When you read out 60%, is that right? 60%.
This is Republican primary polls. He's at 60. I mean, it's basically how Joe Biden's polling in the Democratic primary, and he's the incumbent president. Do you know what I mean? It's staggering stuff.
It was just that is just a total wipeout.
Yeah.
I don't think the rest of the election's going to go like that. I think it's going to be very tight. I'm definitely going to be watching the election.
But the primary, you almost tuned out from the primary then.
Yeah, slightly. Yeah,
Is Nikki Haley moving you in any way? Anything interesting? Do you think she's got a prayer in hell of making this competitive?
I just don't see how anyone's going to override. I think it's very similar to the story in the UK. Just Trump has just got his hands around the Republicans, and he's not letting go. He is just, I don't know what he's done to that party. He gutted that party and just made it his own, and he's just sitting there in his little Trump tower. And yeah, I don't think there's any way it's budging. I think he's going to become. I think he's going to get the. I think he's going to be the Republican in the race, in the two-legged race, or the election. Two-horse race. I can't remember what. Yes.
We're really messing up the metaphors today, aren't we?
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. It keeps it natural, It's flowing,
Iowa is happening a week on Monday. Will you be staying up late watching it? I will, because I'm a sado. But again, Trump's going to win. I'm more interested in who gets second place.
No, I'll set up for it. How do you watch it? Like on BBC or
CNN? CNN. You should be able to get that. I mean, I've got it on Sky. If you have Sky, you can definitely get it.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay.
But if not, probably on the BBC. They tend to do stuff for American elections. But yeah, it'll be interesting. The only thing keeping Trump off, I think the only scenario Trump genuinely loses the nomination is if in February, because obviously most of the contests haven't happened then, if in sort of mid-February the Supreme Court, because it's now taken up this case, decides to agree. So basically, Colorado and I think Maine have taken Trump off the ballot, saying it's because he incited an insurrection on January the 6th. Personally, I think you shouldn't do that unless and until he's convicted in like an actual court of that as a crime. in that case, I can see why they'd do that. Basically, every political and legal analyst seems to agree, most seem to agree, the Supreme Court will smite that down. It'd be quite worrying for democracy if Trump just got taken off the ballot without a trial assessing if he'd actually committed that crime. So it's very, very unlikely, but maybe in the sort of, 1 in 50 chance, the Supreme Court actually goes, yes, he's off the ballot in these states. He's on them until the Supreme Court decides. Yes, he's off, and actually he's off everywhere else as well. In that case, maybe buy stock in DeSantis, because I think Trump's voters wouldn't go to Haley. So I know Haley looks like the main challenger now. I think it could be DeSantis, it could be Vivek Ramaswamy. It will be a Trumpy candidate, but I just don't think it will happen. I mean, can you imagine sort of the political violence and the spectacle if Trump's voters were fully disenfranchised? Like, what would they do?
I think that'd honestly be blood on the streets.
I would be worried.
Yeah, 100%. I think it would be, unless it genuinely was politically, legally gone through all the correct means, and yeah, it would be a disaster. And I think it would be it just would not. It's not how our democratic system was built. I don't think it's how it should be used. So yeah, that's my opinion on it.
Would you say they should take him off if he is convicted in court of actually, causing an insurrection? Because obviously those kind of things are in trial at the moment, and it's quite a tough case. So if he's actually convicted of that crime, would you say this would be something that could be revisited? Because
100%. I think if you break the law, then you break the law.
Yeah.
I don't think it should be. I think it'd be wrong if Trump is convicted and should be taken off the ballot legally and isn't.
Yeah.
I think that would be wrong. So yeah, I think the law should be followed, even if we all have our own opinion on the matter, because in many ways, thank God, opinion doesn't convict, because then we would have a lot of people in prison that shouldn't be in prison.
I agree with that. Okay, finally, Joe Biden has come out of the gate. He's currently facing abysmal polling numbers, but he is trying to make the race about Donald Trump. History shows us in American politics, when the race is about Donald Trump tends to lose. If it's about Joe Biden is going to lose heavily. He's come out the gate targeting Trump in the strongest terms.
Of the new year, speaking near historic Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, ahead of the 3-year anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. In his remarks, which wrapped up just moments ago, he lashed out at his likely re-election opponent in some of the most harsh terms we've heard yet, calling the former president sick, a loser, an election denier, and attacking him for echoing rhetoric from Nazi Germany.
Let's have a little listen to Joe Biden doing this himself. He does sound strong. Actually, coming off this, a Fox News anchor went, that's Joe Biden sounding quite strong there, which I thought was quite funny to see. But he sounds coherent, he sounds put together. American flags behind him. It can't hurt his image. Let's have a listen.
So hear me clearly. I'll say what Donald Trump won't. Political violence is never, ever acceptable in the United States political system. Never, never, never. It has no place in a democracy. None. You can't be pro-insurrectionist and pro-American.
There's a bit more here. It's quite a barnstorming speech.
He calls those who oppose him vermin. He talks about the blood of America as being poisoned, echoing the same exact language used in Nazi Germany. He proudly posts on social media the words that best describe his 2024 campaign, quote, revenge, quote, power, and quote, dictatorship. There's no confusion about who Trump is, what he intends to do.
So, obviously, massive high-stakes election for American democracy. Do you think Biden has it in him? Does this inspire confidence? What do you think, Sonny?
Honestly, I thought this was not a walk in the park, but I thought I didn't see Biden really pulling anything major off. That right there has made me think very differently about the whole thing. I think if Biden can keep that up, and of course, Trump is very difficult to debate against because he doesn't really debate. He just kind of insults you, and kind of undermines you. But I think if more when Trump becomes the it's not leader of the Republican Party, but it's what do they call it,
the nominee. I guess he's been the leader non-stop, really, hasn't he? In a way.
Yeah. When he gets the nominee from the Republican Party, which I think is most likely at this point, except if the Supreme Court does go the way of Maine and Colorado, if Biden can carry on that kind of that pressure, then you know what, this is going to be a bit tighter and closer than I thought. I thought Trump was going to come back all guns blazing, and Democrats were going to either hold on to the skinniest win they've ever had, or just lose out.
I think it's going to be I think this is going to be, if we're using this language, I think it's going to be a very skinny election, Sonny. I think this is going to be skin of one's teeth. I think it's going to be closer, potentially close. Well, let's not make bold predictions, because if Trump is convicted of a crime before the election, don't discount a Biden blowout. But I think the balance of probabilities are it's a narrow win for Trump or a narrow win for Biden.
Yeah, I would say so. And you don't get many big wins with, like, well, I remember when Obama just was coming in for his second term, he just got a majority in the House one of the chambers. I don't do American politics very well, if you can't tell.
He held the Senate, and he won the popular vote for the House, but still the Republicans held the House because the House is weird. It's another interesting. I mean, we won't go into Congress today, but right now the Senate is Democratic. It's favored to go Republican, and the House is Republican, and it's favored to go Democratic. So one chamber flipping one way flipping the other, which in of itself would be a bit weird, I think.
It would. It's
very possible Trump wins the presidency and Democrats take the House at the same time, which will probably be quite annoying for Trump. But American politics, it's a minefield, unpredictable, and this year is going to be very unpredictable.
I think it's going to be unpredictable all over the world, might I say, especially in the UK and in the US.
Yes, although I've much more confidence forecasting our election than the American election.
No, you're right. You're very right about that.
Neck and neck isn't how I describe Sunak and Starmer right now.
You're right. Maybe unpredictable on how far and what the Conservatives are going to try and do.
Yeah.
To see if they can even wrestle, I don't know, something close to, not an absolute annihilation in the election.
And how the other parties do. The SNP, the Lib Dems, Reform, that's all completely up in the air, I think.
Oh, you're right, actually. I think this could be the year of the smaller parties getting their foot back into politics, which I think is really important for our parliamentary political system.
Oh, yeah.
I'd really like to see... I don't really particularly support the Lib Dems, but I'd like to see more of the Lib Dems. We don't even really talk about Northern Ireland that much, but it's all very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, from a democratic perspective, I think it'd be a good thing to have more Lib Dem MPs, Reform MPs, Green MPs, have those voices represented in politics. Definitely. Sonny, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hopefully it will be me, you, and Theo this time next week unpacking what I'm sure will be another tumultuous week in UK and US politics.
Yes, well, also it's the House has been the House won't be adjourned for Christmas anymore, so the parliamentary system will be up and running again.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to look at what happens.
Parliament will be back, and I say on next week's pod, we all do a percentage prediction of the Iowa caucus results, just to put ourselves on the spot.
Okay, fair enough. I'll need to do some brainstorming for that.
Yeah. All right.
I'll be back with that.
Speak to you soon, Sonny. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you so much.